السليل تأتيكم هذا الجمعة على 10:10 صباحا على أمواج إذاعة الجزائر الدولية. كونوا في الموعد.
With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories from Algiers, the president of the France-Algeria Association, Ségolène Royal, welcomed the momentum of the new Algeria and called on France to apologize and make amends for the damage it has caused. Following the passage of a storm in Algeria, the Civil Protection reported several interventions on the ground with no casualties. The UN Security Council deplored the continuation of the genocide in Gaza despite the ceasefire, while the Special Rapporteur for the Palestinian territories called for the suspension of relations with the Zionist entity. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Silmani. The president of the France-Algeria Association, Ségolène Royal, stated in Algiers that Franco-Algerian dialogue must be based on respect and consideration for the Algerian sovereignty, paying tribute to the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, who has launched an extraordinary growth dynamic for a new, sovereign and unaligned Algeria. More with Masoud Sharfi.
In an interview granted to the television channel Canal Algérie, Ms. Royal criticized some French currents for ignoring Algeria's sovereignty and called for dialogue based on respect and consideration. She highlighted Algeria's economic growth and the extraordinary potential of its youth, emphasizing the new Algeria that asserts its sovereignty, non-alignment, and freedom to choose its allies. Ms. Royal said the reconciliation requires full recognition of historical facts and that France must apologize and make reparations, including returning cultural property, archives, and remains of Algerian resistance fighters. She urged President Macron to act and release nuclear test files to aid victims. She called it aberrant that Algeria cooperates with Italy, Spain, and Germany but not France, highlighting France's responsibility. Moreover, Ms. Royal stated that she refused to take part in the report Compliment d'enquête broadcast on France 2 television, describing it as insulting to Algeria and politically biased, and saying she declined to endorse or promote a program she considered unacceptable.
Oui, j'ai refusé de participer à ce reportage. Je devais être l'invité dans les...
Yes, I refused to take part in this report. I was supposed to be the guest in the red chairs at the end of the report, but knowing the extreme sensitivity of the subject, I asked to see the film beforehand. When I saw this film, I told myself that there was no question of my coming to endorse it, or even of helping to generate an audience, because my name attracts viewers on a subject that I totally disapprove of, which is completely insulting to Algeria. I even wrote it by text message, so I have proof of this, and I told them that it was unacceptable. Imagine a public Algerian television channel making a report like this about Emmanuel Macron. Imagine what France would say. How can you even conceive of such a thing where there is not a single positive subject?
Ms. Royal further noted that the report cast discredit on elected officials who are dual nationals, calling it shocking, and said it was deliberately biased, using an isolated claim to suggest consulate interference and timed just 2 months before municipal elections.
Choquant, mais je pense que ce reportage a été commencé quand M. Retailleau était ministre de l'Intérieur.
Shocking, but I think this report was started when Mr. Retailleau was Minister of the Interior, so that doesn't surprise me. I think it was bound to be biased. And the objective of this report, when you really think about it, is to disqualify dual nationals, because you have an anonymous audio clip from an elected official claiming she is under pressure from the consulate, whereas if you question all dual nationals, that is not the case. And on the other hand, I mean, consulates are always in contact with the country, with their nationals, indeed to energize them and to encourage encourage them to project a positive image of their country. This is not interference as it is portrayed in this report, but there is only one piece of evidence. So you see, the mechanism that consists of disqualifying elected officials who are dual nationals, injecting this little poison of suspicion of interference, it's deliberate. And on the other hand, not by coincidence, it comes 2 months before the municipal elections.
D'une part, et d'autre part, comme par hasard, c'est à 2 mois des élections municipales.
Ms. Royal said she was working to promote friendship and economic and cultural projects in Algeria, emphasizing its strategic role as a gateway to Africa and warning that action is needed before it's too late.
Now, a delegation from the National People's Assembly led by Mr. Abdullah Hashaya has taken part in Panama in the summit of the presidents of the parliaments of Latin America and the Caribbean Par-Latino. During the session dedicated to observer members, Mr. Hashaya delivered a speech on behalf of the President of the Assembly, Mr. Ibrahim Boughali, in which he highlighted the Assembly's commitment to supporting parliamentary cooperation with Par-Latino and the importance of parliamentary diplomacy in strengthening dialogue, bringing peoples closer together, and promoting the principles of peace and South-South cooperation. He highlighted Algeria's development experience under President Abdelmadjid Tebboune, including social policies, health, employment, education, entrepreneurship, youth empowerment and investment, and reaffirmed the country's commitment to self-determination, state sovereignty, non-interference and sustainable development. Still in Algeria, strong winds will continue to affect several provinces of the country until tomorrow Friday, according to a special weather bulletin issued by the Algerian Meteorology Office. Masoud Shafi has more.
According to this bulletin, classified at the orange alert level, wind gusts could exceed 90 kilometers per hour, affecting northern Ain Timoshint as well as the provinces of Tlemcen, Oran, Mustaganem, Shlef, Tipaza, Maskar, Ghelizan, El Bayad, Tiaret, Tisimsilt, Ain Difla, Mdia, Lagwat, Jilfa and Msila. Authorities are maintaining vigilance due to adverse weather conditions affecting several provinces of the country, which have prompted multiple interventions by civil protection services. The current extreme weather conditions caused more than 370 interventions by civil protection services yesterday, mainly due to fallen trees, poles, power lines, exterior walls, roofs of old buildings, and objects such as billboards and traffic signs. In a statement to the Algerian Press Service, the Deputy Director of Information and Statistics of the General Directorate of Civil Protection, Lieutenant Colonel Nassim Bernawi, reported that no fatalities were recorded despite winds reaching speeds of up to 120 kilometers per hour in some provinces. However, 13 people were reported with minor injuries in the provinces of Algiers, Mustaganem, Oran, Blida, Skikda, Galma and Shlef. Lieutenant Colonel Bernawi indicated that the province with the highest number of interventions was Tipaza with 48 operations, followed by Sidi Bel Abbas, Constantine and Algiers. Authorities recommend that the public take maximum precautions while these weather conditions persist.
You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Now to the Palestinian issue. The permanent representative of Palestine to the United Nations, Riyad Mansour, announced that at least 500 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire came into effect in the Gaza Strip last October, calling on the Zionist occupation to withdraw completely from the Palestinian enclave. In a speech delivered during the session of the UN Security Council devoted to the situation in the Middle East, Mansour emphasized the need for an immediate end to the Israeli massacres and unhindered humanitarian access throughout Gaza.
We supported the ceasefire in good faith, even in the face of repeated breaches, with at least 500 Palestinians killed since the ceasefire came into effect, with many more wounded and ongoing destruction by the occupying power, and while life-saving assistance, including shelter, continues to be obstructed in the depths of this harsh winter. Furthermore, we are obliged to underscore yet again, Israel is not the sovereign in the Palestinian territory. This illegal occupation has no rights whatsoever in occupied Palestine, including in Jerusalem. The ceasefire's permanence and success requires that Israel cease trying to dictate the future of Gaza and to fully withdraw from the territory. Gaza is an integral part of the Palestinian territory. It belongs to the Palestinian people, nobody else.
Regarding the humanitarian situation in the enclave, devastated by 2 years of genocidal war, the Palestinian representative to the UN denounced the systematic and continuous obstruction by the Zionist entity of the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza, calling for the protection of the work of the UNRWA throughout the Palestinian territory.
Israel must end its ongoing war against humanitarian actors, including UNRWA and vital NGOs, whose safety and ability to operate have been repeatedly undermined. The destruction of UNRWA facilities, including the seizure and destruction of its headquarters in occupied East Jerusalem, which was also set ablaze, and the targeting of humanitarian personnel, and now the attempt to ban and expel recognized and respected NGOs operating on Palestinian territory demonstrate total contempt for the very mechanisms established to protect and assist civilians. It is an attack on the United Nations by one of its members in ways we had never witnessed before.
Mr. Mansour also warned against the danger posed by the acceleration of settlement plans in the occupied West Bank. In his briefing during the quarterly open session, the Deputy Special Coordinator for the United Nations for the Middle East peace process, Ramiz Al-Akbarov, confirmed that almost all of Gaza's population still needs humanitarian aid, given the blockade imposed by the Zionist occupation on the entry of aid and its continued violations of the ceasefire agreement.
Nearly the entire population in Gaza remains in need of humanitarian assistance. Heavy rainfall and cold temperatures has exacerbated the suffering of more than 1.5 million displaced Palestinians in Gaza, who had little or no means to seek safe shelter. The shelter response has suffered from restrictions for the entry of vital materials and technical expertise. Transitional shelter sites must provide access to much needed essential services. Above all, they must be voluntary and dignified, and in line with humanitarian principles. The support of all stakeholders is needed. Across all sectors, humanitarian actors are still unable to operate at scale in Gaza. Their work is being hindered by insecurity, custom clearance challenges, the limited number of partners authorized by Israeli authorities to bring cargo into Gaza. The Israeli military continues to conduct military operations with airstrikes, shelling, and gunfire occurring across the street.
Regarding the situation in the West Bank, Mr. Al-Akbarov noted that continuous and extreme settler violence continues to fuel tensions and forcibly displace Palestinians.
Negative trends are entrenched daily. The reporting period was marked by continued violence with extensive Israeli military operations, settlement expansion, settler violence, demolition, and large-scale detentions. There have been large-scale arrest campaigns of Palestinians by Israeli security forces, including children, amidst reports of ill treatment and torture and continued deaths in custody. Persistent and extreme settlers' violence, frequently accompanied or supported by Israeli security forces, continues to inflame tensions, forcibly displace Palestinians, and exacerbate instability. The consequences have been severe, deepening the occupation, fragmenting Palestinian space, and strengthening territorial contiguity for settlement. And ultimately, these steps are further undermining the prospects for peace and the establishment of a two-state solution. Unless urgently addressed, they may also jeopardize progress on implementing the second phase of the ceasefire agreement.
For his part, China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Fu Kong, called for joint efforts towards a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. During the UN meeting, he said that more than 3 months after the conclusion of the ceasefire agreement in Gaza, Israeli military strikes continue and the number of civilian casualties continue to rise.
加沙第一阶段停火协议达成已经3个多月，但军事袭击仍未停止。
Over 3 months have passed since the first phase ceasefire agreement in Gaza was reached. However, military strikes are still ongoing and civilian casualties continue to rise. The situation in the West Bank remains tense, where the occupying power continues to expand settlements and condone settler violence. China calls on all parties, in particular Israel, to fully comply with the ceasefire agreement and work towards a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire in Gaza. Israel should immediately halt settlement activities and curb settler violence. It is crucial to alleviate civilian suffering and ensure unhindered humanitarian access to occupied territory. The humanitarian situation in Gaza remains dire, with restricted access for humanitarian assistance. We urge Israel to fulfill its obligations under international humanitarian law, open all border crossings, lift restrictions on humanitarian access, and cease its suppression of humanitarian agencies.
停止对人道机构的打压。
That was the China's permanent representative to the United Nations, Fu Kong. The UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, has called for the suspension of relations with the Zionist entity, demanding the facilitation of relief entry into the Gaza Strip, which has been subjected to brutal Israeli aggression over the past 2 years. Albanese said in a post on her official social media account that the Zionist occupation has no legal authority to prevent humanitarian organizations and relief workers from entering the Gaza Strip and the rest of the occupied Palestinian territories. She added that the occupation is illegal and must end completely and unconditionally, as affirmed by the International Court of Justice in 2024, noting that the Israeli occupation continues a pattern of harassment of UN aid workers and international non-governmental organizations, especially those who are seen as too outspoken about what they see on the ground. Meanwhile, the Palestinian resistance movement Hamas welcomed on Thursday the condemnation by 9 European countries, as well as Canada and Japan, of the arbitrary measures taken by the Zionist entity against the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestinian Refugees, Palestinians, UNRWA, including the demolition of its premises in occupied Al-Quds, calling for these positions to be translated into concrete actions to put pressure on the occupation. The foreign ministers of Belgium, Canada, Denmark, France, Iceland, Ireland, Japan, Norway, Portugal, Spain, and the United Kingdom strongly condemned the demolitions by the Israeli authorities on the 28th of January of 2026 this month. In a joint statement, this unprecedented act against a United Nations agency by a UN member state marked the latest unacceptable move to undermine their ability to operate. Now to our African news. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of the Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has confirmed that the siege and escalating fighting have worsened the humanitarian crisis in the city of Dalang in South Kordofan State, South Sudan, noting that access routes to the city remain cut off. Masud Shafi has more in this report.
OCHA reported that the prolonged siege of Dalang by the Rapid Paramilitary Support Forces RSF has created a critical humanitarian situation with limited aid operations and only a few NGOs able to operate, noting that half the city's population was displaced last year. The office called for de-escalation and an end to hostilities to facilitate aid delivery. The 3 states of the Kordofan region have witnessed fierce clashes between the Sudanese army and the RSF for the past 3 months, resulting in the displacement of tens of thousands. In this connection, the Sudan Doctors Network reported more than 1,300 cases of malnutrition, mostly children, in Dalang, South Kordofan. The network urged international and UN organizations to urgently establish a humanitarian corridor to Dalang, warning of extremely critical conditions after a 2-year 2-year siege with severe shortages of medical staff, food and supplies, stressing the immediate need for aid convoys, protection of medical facilities, and the safety of civilians and health workers. The Sudanese army had announced that its forces entered Dalang after a 2-year siege by the RSF. The RSF imposed a siege on Dalang in January 2024, causing a shortage of food and medicine due to difficulties in delivering supplies. Since April 2023, the country has been experiencing armed conflicts between the Sudanese army and the RSF, causing thousands of deaths and displacing millions.
The Democratic Republic of the Congo and the United Nations have launched an urgent appeal to raise $1.4 billion to fund life-saving assistance for millions of people, particularly in the eastern part of the country where the situation has continued to deteriorate since a year ago. According to OCHA, funds are running out, forcing aid to focus on 7.3 million of the most vulnerable people. UN humanitarian coordinator in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Bruno Le Marquis, said that the combination of immense needs and limited resources forces us to make extremely difficult and sometimes impossible choices. This year's response program in the Democratic Republic of the Congo focuses on areas affected by conflict, climate risks and epidemics, covering 228 health zones, down from 332 in 2025. You're still listening to Radio Algeria International. Next is our weekly program, the Health Magazine, focusing on drug abuses.
Today's edition of your weekly program, the Health Magazine, will try and shed light